This will be a shorter one, but ever since I first saw this image, I knew I had to make something out of it. This photo depicts the Club Sega arcade in Akihabara on its last night of operation. It's a powerful image. The staff, who almost all look to be younger than the arcade itself, which had been in operation since the 80s, bowing in gratitude and contrition to a crowd of onlookers so large it's clearly spilling outside the edges of the frame. There are a few angles one could take when talking about this photo, most of them at least a little sad, as is to be expected. One could connect it to the gradual decline in Japanese arcade culture that was accelerated by COVID. That said, one would have to hedge that point a little by acknowledging that that space was bought out by Bandai Namco, and while I don't exactly have data to back this up, they seem to be doing well enough there. One could specifically relate the closure to Sega's decline as a company. There may be a kernel of truth to that, but look, people have been making the Sega fell off argument ever since the mid-90s, at least. Understandably so to some extent, but it's just not a novel point for me to make in the year 2024. And I'm nothing if not a maker of novel points, so here's one. Do y'all remember when Roger Ebert beefed with gamers? Some context if you don't. Roger Ebert was a film critic, considered by many to be the best to ever do it. Well, personally, while I read plenty of other critics, depending on what mood I'm in, I don't disagree with that assessment, at least not enough to build an argument refuting it. He was good, and probably uniquely good for somebody who had to put out new stuff pretty much every day. Which is why it gives me no pleasure to point out that this guy I've spent much of my life looking up to didn't much care for video games. I won't go over his arguments. They were made in 2010, and since Ebert died in 2013, it's impossible to ask him if they would still hold sway in the medium as it exists today, a whole learner's permit worth of years later. What I want to bring up is the second post he made on the subject, where, in response to some apparently level-headed critique of his prior points, he hedges his bets a little. Ebert concludes that second post, adorably titled, "Okay Kids, Play on My Lawn," with an attempt at defining art. An attempt that is, as it usually is, unsuccessful. Quote, "I concluded without a definition that satisfied me. I had to be prepared to agree that gamers can have an experience that, for them, is art. I don't know what they can learn about another human being that way, no matter how much they learn about human nature. I don't know if they can be inspired to transcend themselves. Perhaps they can." Now, as someone who has made multiple videos paralleling video games to other works of art, from rock music all the way to poetry, you can reasonably assume where I stand on that. Absolutely they can. But I think when that question, are games art, is asked, more often than not, it's answered with theory. Ebert certainly was. And if it's not answered with theory, it's answered with names. Big names, auteur names like Fumito Ueda and Hideo Kojima and Eric Shahi. Sure, the theory stuff has its place, and those are all unquestionably brilliant artists, but what if, once in a while, when that question is asked, and in fairness, it seems like it's not asked quite as often these days, at least not by people who are already presuming that the answer is no, we respond in another way. With images like these, showing in no uncertain terms what this young art means to so many people in so many places. Images of the people who haven't put their name on anything monumental, but who work tirelessly to keep the lights on. And the people who are endlessly grateful to them for doing that. For me, that's what matters. You can use theory to legitimize or delegitimize whatever you want. But you can't unmove someone. It would be insane to try to convince someone at that Club Sega on its last day that it doesn't really matter that it's shutting down, because after all, games aren't art. Because even if they've never said it aloud, the people in that crowd, both the staffers and spectators, know intuitively that games are art. Because they felt it every time they walked through those doors. Thanks for watching.